as you just heard, both Sian and I come from Cambridge English Language Assessment, which is a sister company of Cambridge University Press. And the title of our talk today is Not Just a Mark, How Assessment and Learning Go Hand in Hand. So what we're really going to be talking about today is about the philosophy of Cambridge assessment. This is what we believe in where I work. It's about learning and assessment really developing together and one working to support the other. So that's very much going to be what we'll talk about today. So here's just a very quick overview of what we hope to go through with you. We're going to look at how learning and assessment are integrated. We're going to look at some theory and practice. We come from a research group, so for us, theoretical background is very, very important to situate what we're doing in some kind of theory. But also, we're both teachers, Sian and I, so we really know how important it is to come down from the theory into practice and give you some specific practical examples of what we're talking about. And finally, we're going to look at technology, because technology is extremely widespread and it's really making a mark on how learning happens, how assessment happens, and how the two can actually come together. Okay? So that's the plan for today. All right, now let's start with a task for you. This is a very, very short task. We've given you 4 scenarios, and we'd like you to choose the one example which is, or choose as many examples as you think suitable, which are examples of assessment. Okay? So read through the 4 tasks and choose the ones that you think represent assessment examples. Let's look at number 1. Monitoring learners' language while they're doing group work and noting down the errors that you're going to focus on later on in class. Is this an example of assessment? Very unanimous. Okay, an example of assessment. Number 2, doing a test at the end of secondary school to assess overall ability in English. Is this an example of assessment? Okay, another yes. Number 3, asking learners to complete a self-evaluation of their writing. Is this an example of assessment? Okay. And number 4, taking a test of academic English as part of admissions into university. Okay, so what is being said here is that it's about level of formality. So some are examples of students assessing themselves in a classroom, and some are examples of students taking a standardized test. Any other thoughts on how these are different? Okay, so what I'm hearing there is summative assessment and formative assessment. The purpose of the test. Right. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, for example, number 2 and number 4 are essentially the same type of thing, but one is to assess the level of achievement for outcome, and the number 4 is really as a beginning level to assure that they would have the right placement, for example. And so it could even be essentially the same test, the same instrument that you're using, but you're using it for different purposes.
Yeah, that's right. So we've heard some really, really good ideas. Level of formality, summative versus formative distinction. The purpose of the test is very different. So this is typically the distinction that you see. 2 and 4 are often considered assessment proper in a way, because they're done in a very formal way, they're standardized tests. And examples 1 and 3 are much more examples of classroom assessment, a lot less formal, different purpose. We would argue at Cambridge that all 4 are examples of assessment, because all 4 give information, evidence, data about where learners are. This is very much part of our philosophy. The distinction between formative and summative, it's very intuitive, it's very easy, it's user-friendly, but we think maybe it's a false distinction, it's a false dichotomy, since a lot of examples of assessment that we do in the classroom or outside can actually give really useful information. So let's think about this, formative versus summative. Now, I've chosen this image intentionally. When you see a chessboard, what do you think about? What does a chess game represent? Strategy maybe, what else? Sorry? Maneuvers. Winner process. Risk. I would say it also represents war. Would you agree? So you've got the white versus the black, and they're in opposition. There's a conflict between them. This is the formative versus summative conflict. So this is how traditionally assessment has been viewed. So summative assessment has been seen as being very large scale, very formalized, standardized, and formative assessment has been seen as classroom-based. So two different camps, two different teams, two different armies almost. That's the traditional view of assessment. However, we think that both of these kinds of assessment ultimately lead to learning. And here's what some people say about assessment. This is not just the way Cambridge English believes about this, but this is what some academics say. So Dempster, several decades ago, said tests can both foster and measure learning. And that's very true. It depends how you use the test, the purpose of the test that you were talking about. They can both foster and measure learning, so they can be both formative and summative at the same time. Carlis, very prominent researcher in the field of assessment for learning and learning-oriented assessment, says for all assessments, whether predominantly summative or formative, a key aim is to promote productive student learning. So that's very much what we believe in at Cambridge English, that we think it's not useful to think of you do assessment in the classroom, you learn, then you stop and you do another assessment. We believe that they both need to be linked, so that they both assessment approaches lead to learning at the end of the day. So really, this is what we'll talk about a little bit more about today, how assessment can be used to support learning. And I'm going to give over to Sian now so that you can give you some more specific practical examples of how these two ends of the continuum can actually come together in supporting learning.
Thank you. Is it this one for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello. So, okay, there's my little girl. So, look at this little girl. She's a learner, but we're all learners because we're all learning all the time. So, if what we need to do is put the learner at the centre of the learning process, if we can manage to involve learners in their own learning, they can then learn to set goals and progress in small incremental steps. And here we have the Cambridge model of learning-oriented assessment, which actually puts the learner in a strategic role in the cycle of learning. It's an organising framework to form a bridge between learning and assessment. And as you can see, we have the learner included inside and outside the classroom, and the whole framework of classroom assessment and institutional assessment involves the learner. So how do we involve learners in their own learning? One of the things we can do is encourage them to be a language detective. And this phrase comes from the late Dave Willis, who was a fabulous English teacher. And he said, as a learner, you have valuable experience of English. If you examine that experience, you will learn from it. So Dave believed in involving students actively in their own learning, encouraging deliberate reflection of language so that they could then see how language works for communication, set their own goals, and become independent learners. So how do we involve students in their own learning? On the left, we have 3 different activities that teachers can carry out with their students. Sharing assessment criteria, so taking the fear out of assessment and taking the mystery out of it. Giving performance samples, showing them what good language looks like, successful performance looks like, and having class discussions. By sharing assessment criteria, you're giving the student the tools to be able to assess themselves. And I find that once you give them these criteria, it's like a light bulb moment. They suddenly think this is what they're looking for. With performance samples, if we give students performance just above their own level, so for example, B2 students, if we show them C1 writing, they can set themselves realistic, attainable goals, and that's a model of realistic success for them. Having class discussions, if we talk about language in class with the students, perhaps processing an already used reading comprehension and using it again to talk about features of language such as linkers or opinion markers, you start to use language to talk about language, and that's a really win-win situation. In fact, Allwright believed that more class discussions, what he called plenary discussions, actually are more useful than teacher comments at the side of the written work. And that by doing this kind of activity, that students would learn on a deeper level. And on the right, we have all the benefits of these activities. Encouraging inquiry, making the student curious about language, encouraging reflection, seeing what the next step is and realizing what gaps you have to fill, and encouraging goal setting, so setting realistic goals for the next step. All of this gives an awareness of strengths and weaknesses and celebrates achievement rather than counting errors, because I don't know a teacher yet who's managed to eliminate errors from their students' work. So we need to show students what achievement looks like and celebrate that achievement. And that gives them agency, and they become active learners. Here we have an example of some criteria that I co-constructed with a class I taught last year. If you give students criteria, it can be very empowering and very powerful. And as you can see, here we've got a broad range of criteria, including fluency, grammatical range, vocabulary, vocabulary appropriacy, as well as interpersonal communication, plus structuring and highlighting. It's really useful, I think, to give this kind of range of criteria, which is the criteria used in most English tests, to students, especially a multilingual class, because students from different cultures often have different strengths. So if you show them that fluency is not the only measure of speaking language, then they realise that the shy guy in the corner, who's maybe not so fluent but has got excellent pragmatic use of English, that's another component in language ability. And that can be very powerful. They start to think about their own language and they start to set goals for the different criteria. I did an experiment with my students in the multinational class. I asked them to record themselves doing a very short talk for 1 minute, then listen to the recording and record their reflections on it and what they wanted to improve. Then they did the recording a second time and they incorporated some of their goals. And here are just a selection. Most of them actually did change it the second time, and most of them implemented the changes and added others incidentally. So here you have an example of some of them. As you can see, they cover all the criteria. At the top, we have Fred saying, I think I have to connect more my phrases. I'm going to try and do it like a straight line. So he was talking about cohesion there. We've got Lindsay, who is very good at grammar and prided herself in that. And she said, oh, I found some grammar mistakes, even though I'm already familiar with the grammar, so I need to work on that. So she realised that perhaps she needed to attend a little bit more to accuracy, which was for her an important value. Then we have Hallie, who was worried about her fluency. I think I have too many pauses during my talk, and I often say between words, and it's not good. Then you've got Helen. We were in the States here, and she said, I realised that I repeated the same words to describe one thing, such as fancy. In the States, they use fancy a lot for something that's smart or elegant. And she wants to expand her vocabulary and not just use the same words. And in the middle, we have Martina, who was perhaps the most able of this class and actually attends more to discourse features and formality. So she says, I'll change the closure because it's too much informal, so she's aware of register and doesn't really close my speech, so discourse appropriateness. So you see that the students, in one short activity, which any teacher can do in class, as long as they've got their mobile phones, is actually an important learning experience for them. That was with an advanced class, but here you could still ask students to self-assess if you give them scaffolding with this kind of questionnaire. So the other class was very fluent. If you've got a class which is less fluent, then you can scaffold and give them boxes to tick. And the effect is still the same of reflecting on your own performance. And also it's given the success criteria of, can I justify myself with 3 reasons? That's their ultimate success criteria. The benefits of sharing criteria with students are enormous, and it gives them the tools to take charge of their own learning and set the goals that they want to set. Okay? So it's a bridge from assessment to learning. It allows them to set goals. They're giving themselves feedback, or to each other, because they can peer assess as well. And it ultimately leads to autonomous learning, because the activity that we looked at just now is an activity that those students, if they wanted to, could do throughout their language learning career without a teacher. Okay, now let's have a look at how we can use corpora. Are you all familiar with corpus linguistics, most of you? Okay, they're electronic collections of texts, and they allow you to look at language from a different angle. And here I've put in student essays. I asked them to write a letter to the editor complaining about university fees being hiked, and also, or they could choose a car park that was going to be built. I noticed when I was grading these essays that they used the word good a lot, and they didn't use a very wide range of vocabulary. And this phenomenon has been described as, by Hasselgreen, as students' lexical teddy bears. They like the same words and they use them all the time. So I wanted to make them aware of this. It's complex composing, so they'd obviously defaulted to the first word that came to their minds. So I put the essays into a concordance program, and I got these. So I asked them then to have a look at the fact that they'd use this word good, and there's nothing wrong with good, but if they're going to do higher level exams, then they need to build up more sophisticated level of vocabulary. So I asked them to look at each sentence and try and find an alternative for good in each one. I have a look at the first one. This was taken from a letter to the editor about a rise in tuition fees, and they used the argument that you need the university education to get a good job. Now, get a good job is fine, we all use it, but I asked them to try and think of something more precise. So let's have a look at what they came up with. Okay, this is interesting because this was an Italian class, and here it's sort of the choices that they made often reveal aspects of the value systems of the country they come from. So can anybody guess which of those words comes from something that's dear to Italian people's hearts? Well paid, okay, well paid. That was some people. Permanent. In Italy, it's really, it's everybody's goal to get a permanent job. So a lot of them said permanent. So while we were discussing these, we were generating vocabulary, but we were also talking about values. And that's a useful, a sort of natural conversation topic that came out. For the second line, they were talking about the underground car park, and they use the word good points a lot. Now, point is a very important word for organising discourse. So I asked them to think of other words that could go with points, and they thought of these alternatives. But interestingly, some of them then changed the word point to for other text organising words like advantages, reasons, aspects. So they were going beyond the single word into pushing forward their discourse as well and thinking beyond the single word. So I thought that was very interesting. Okay, that was a small learner corpus, but we have a large database of learner writing at Cambridge Assessment. It's an enormous resource, and we've analysed learner language at each CEFR level and found out the typical vocabulary that occurs at the different levels. And here you've got an example of that, with the word catch. And as you can see, at A1 level, catch is usually used in the sense of to travel, catch a train. A2, they've progressed to using catch a cold. And then B2, discover someone, catch somebody doing something, and so on. There's C2 there. So you see that the same words are used but in a different way, perhaps a more metaphorical way, as the levels go up. And this is a really useful resource. It's free online, and I think it's quite helpful for teachers, materials developers, but also for learners themselves. Okay, I said earlier about working with model texts and the importance of giving students models that were attainable rather than unrealistic native speaker level. And a few years ago, I worked with some students. They were writing essays on minority languages. And I showed them, this was a B2 class, but it was one of those titles that I'd recycled, essay prompts that I'd recycled over the years. And I had some C1 level essays on the same subject, and I asked them to look at them with some guided questions. And here are some of their reflections. Okay, so the first example I've given you here, there were a lot of comments, is focusing a little bit on language used to organise, so discourse structure. I like the structure used to start the second paragraph, let's try to imagine. I think it's an involving construction which catches the reader attention. So this person is looking at discourse, but also interpersonal features, because he says, I think it's quite involving. The second person concentrates more on support, content to support the point. I like the final image of the grandparents who can tell folk tales to their grandchildren without the help of the interpreter. So these are high-level students. They were able to attend less to grammar and problems at sentence level and start to look at composition features. Okay, the idea of quoting from a book was great in order to give the text a more academic tone. And a powerful argument is mentioned in the third paragraph, that of the cohesive property of language and the double link between language and culture. Okay, these are quite high-level students, but high-level students need to move on from intermediate to advanced. And this kind of activity can help them push themselves that little bit further, notice what other students can do that they can't do, and move forward with their learning. And I'm going to hand you back to Evelina now.
Thank you, Sian. So we started with an overview of how we think that learning and assessment really are integrated, and formative, summative assessment really need to work together. Sian has given you 3 very micro-level specific examples of how that can happen in practice. And now we'll just spend a little bit of time thinking about technology, because we really believe that to do assessment which supports learning on a large scale, whether in the classroom or outside of the classroom, you need technology. That's the accelerator. That is what allows it to happen on a large scale. So we spend a little bit of time thinking through with you how technology affects learning and assessment. So it used to be, to learn you needed an expert called a teacher and a classroom of students and a textbook, maybe. But really, actually, that's not necessary anymore. You can learn in different ways. And in fact, there's some very controversial scholars in applied linguistics who say that you don't need a teacher. All you need is a computer with internet access and students. So, I mean, that is an extreme that I happen to disagree with. But the point is, learning is no longer what it used to be. It's no longer based in a classroom with a teacher, an expert, and a group of students. Learning is more challenging with technology, is the point being made here. Partly because learning forces students not to rely on a teacher so much anymore. They're not getting as much hand-holding as they used to. So a lot of the learning now happens outside of the classroom, where there is no teacher present. So it forces them to be more autonomous, which is actually, is it good to be autonomous as a learner? Yes, it is. So in fact, it's pushing students to develop autonomy, which is ultimately a good thing, but it's challenging. More effective, I think that's what you captured as well. More difficult. Partly because it's pushing students to develop new skills, but also I'd say it's more difficult for teachers as well. In a lot of education institutions I've been to, even in really, really high quality schools, there's an assumption sometimes that you just have to bring technology in the classrooms and teachers can run with it. Teachers know what to do with it. But actually, teachers need training to be able to integrate technology in a meaningful way. Technology on its own doesn't do anything. Technology that is used just to substitute for what the teacher can do doesn't add much value either. So it's more difficult because both students and teachers need to be developing new skills. It's also more expensive with technology. Okay, I'm going to just talk you through some examples of how at Cambridge English, and these are examples not just from Cambridge English Language Assessment, but also from Cambridge University Press, some examples of how technology we're using in serving both learning and assessment. So this is an example of a game, an app that is freely available from the App Store. It's called Quiz Your English. It's quite basic in what it does, in that it focuses on grammar and vocabulary. But actually, it's been downloaded many, many times, quite high download rate, and it functions on the basis of competition. So you can have competitions with classmates, you can have a competition with someone in another part of the world you've never met before. So you do activities, grammar and vocabulary activities, and you compete with one another. That way you collect points. There is a leaderboard. Every month, the leaderboard gets refreshed, so you have a new chance every month to be the top of the board. And I think that the top on the leaderboard was a learner from, I don't remember where she was from, but she had done something like 1,000 activities to get to the top of the leaderboard in a few weeks. So that's addictive. That's what we want in learning, in digital products supporting learning. We want them to be so addictive that learners cannot put them down, and they keep wanting to get more content. So this is just one example of technology bringing learning and assessment together. And this is useful because you can say, I want a task at B2 level, or I want a task at a different level. So you need that external frame of reference from beginner to advanced, and then tasks that help you develop alongside that frame of reference. Here's another example, technology, learning and assessment. This is from a company we're working with called Sergo. And Sergo produce apps, digital products which help you practice vocabulary. So this is a vocabulary app. Now on the left is a very old-fashioned flashcard. It has a word and then an explanation of the word. This is to develop vocabulary for an exam called IELTS. Plateau is a very high-frequency word in IELTS because in IELTS writing you have a graph, and you often have to describe the trends in the graph. So in a graph, when you have no up or down movement, that's a plateau, okay? But this actually, is this very advanced in terms of learning, would you say, flashcards? Are they advanced in terms of learning? Not really. When I was learning English many years ago, that's what I had in my pocket, right? A lot of you probably did. You have a word on one side and the translation often on another side. So this is an example of how you can take something without really adding much value. However, and this is why we work with these people, what you see on the right is the methodology this is based on, and it's on something called spaced repetition. That means that as you're getting new words from the app, from the digital product, you're getting them at different intervals that the software has decided is the optimal interval for you. So when the software thinks you're in danger of forgetting a word, because last time you had it was a few weeks ago, you're given that word again. So that's the example of technology adding value and supporting learning and assessment in this case, because this is geared towards an exam. So brilliant example of how the added value, the enhanced function of technology is brought into practice here. So spaced repetition, theory of forgetting and remembering. Here's another example, technology bringing learning and assessment together. This is a course developed by Cambridge University Press and Cambridge English Language Assessment, and it's a course called Empower that probably a lot of you have heard about already. But it's a course that we're very proud of because it really is a very practical example of how learning and assessment can come together. Just to give you one example, you can take a grammar test, for example, that practices the grammar learned in class that day, and then you take a little quiz at the end, just a little learning check. Based on your performance on that learning check, on that quiz, you're then given different extension activities. So if you didn't do very well, you get to repeat that grammar point again. If you did more or less okay, you get one activity which is different from the people who did very well. They get a different extension activity. So there's a branching mechanism built in that gives you content based on how you've performed. Another example of technology bringing assessment and learning together, in Empower, at the end of every unit, there is a mini speaking test. Now, you don't often have speaking tests in textbooks which are based on technology because that needs very advanced technology. So this little mini speaking test uses natural language processing to understand the learners and give them an indication of their pronunciation and their fluency. So it's limited. It's not what a teacher, it does just a sliver of what a teacher can do, but it does it instantly. The student can do it whenever they want and they get instant feedback. And that's what every learner wants. Feedback that comes very, very soon after the performance so they can put it into practice. So Empower, we think, is a really, really positive way forward of combining learning and assessment through technology. Here's one more example. This is a digital product called Write and Improve. This is another product that we're very proud of because it provides feedback for learners. So it does what it says. You write something and then you improve by getting feedback on what you've written. And I'm going to play you a short video just to give you a taste of what it's like. So can we have the video, please? Thank you.
These are clearly impressive figures behind Write and Improve, the exciting new tool available to teachers and students of English around the world. The apparent simplicity of the user interface belies the intelligent technology that drives it. Even as you watch this short introduction, Write and Improve is itself learning and evolving, consolidating its place as an engaging and comprehensive learning experience at the forefront of technology. Write and Improve helps teachers to support their students as well as encouraging learners to have a go themselves. Learners can dive straight in, no need to register or log in, and it's free to use. The potential to write and to improve is accessible to learners at every level of ability, from schools and colleges to the world of business and commerce. To engender and sustain a real enthusiasm for learning, Write and Improve offers a wide range of subjects to write about. There are different levels depending on the learner's capabilities, along with the range of prompts which reflect what a learner might face in their exams. From the student's perspective, the system is beautifully simple. You write, you submit your work, Write and Improve reviews and returns it in a matter of seconds. This very simplicity underlines the dynamic power of the tool. Not only is it fast, but it is also context-aware. In other words, it can assess whether a student's response is relevant to what was asked. In fact, the system comprehensively coaches the learner and helps them to focus on areas of improvement. One of the most exciting features of Write and Improve is the intelligence with which it gathers and incorporates data progressively through use. And as the tool refines itself, it engages the user, encouraging them to take personal responsibility for their development. And this is just the beginning. Write and Improve's data is a vital input in a variety of...
Thank you. This was really just to kind of give you a taste of it. This video is available. You can watch it online. Going back to Write and Improve, it's a free resource, something I forgot to say. So any learner can really use it and any teacher can use it. And whenever I've presented this to teachers, it's been fantastic to see that aha moment. And one teacher said, oh, next time I sign an essay, I can tell my learners to put it through Write and Improve first, work on the first draft, and then give me the second draft. So it's good because it makes learners more autonomous, gives them responsibility, and it frees time for the teacher to focus on things that the machine cannot do. So really, really useful resource for learners. It's very good for intermediate and beginner level learners. The higher up the learners become, the more difficult it is for the software to give meaningful feedback, because then you're getting into organization and how to develop ideas in a more in-depth way, and that's what the machine really cannot do so well. But fantastic for beginner and intermediate level. So that's Write and Improve. Another example, technology, learning and assessment. Video conferencing. It is very easy now to talk to people at the other side of the world, and it's in fact what learners do all the time, because they don't really talk face to face anymore in the same room. They really communicate via technology to people who are not presently there with them. One of the unique features of Cambridge English exams is that we have speaking tests which are face to face. That means you have a human element. You're not losing speaking to a machine, because when you introduce a machine into speaking assessment, you're testing something much narrower, just production, but not interaction. So this is one way to keep that face-to-face interaction element in an exam, but reduce or rather increase the practicality, reduce the logistic burden of having people in the same place. Automated speech recognition. I mentioned Empower and the little mini speaking test at the end of Empower. That's based on automated speech recognition. We're putting this into our exams as well. So we have an exam called LinguaSkill, which is going to be coming out soon, next year, the speaking component, that uses automated speech recognition. The test is more narrow, so therefore it's geared towards a segment of speaking only, but it gives instant feedback and instant results, which is a very, very positive feature. One final example before we wrap up, Google Expeditions. We have at Cambridge English, and I've given you the website here, an example of a speaking test. So you can put the glasses on and you can see what happens when you go to take a speaking test in a Cambridge exam. And that's really important because a lot of learners tell us that they feel very anxious when they take a speaking exam. This helps, hopefully, helps reduce their anxiety. So when they do come, they know what's going to happen. They just have to worry about their language, not anything else. And finally, we'll just leave you with this quote that actually Sian included here, but it's a fantastic one from Yeats, who says, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And we think that both good materials, such as the ones produced by Cambridge University Press, and good assessments, such as the ones produced by our organization, serve this function to light the fire because they motivate learners to keep progressing in that ladder of improving their language. If you'd like to find out more, we have a book, which is a very academic book, so it's quite dense, but it explains the philosophy we've been talking about here called learning-oriented assessment. So it talks about the integration of summative and formative assessment. So that's a book in the Studies in Language Testing series. These are two websites that you might find useful, digitalteacher.com, that explains about the digital skills teachers need to use technology and to integrate learning and assessment, and the beta.cambridge.org gives you examples of the latest products we've been working on. And then on YouTube we have Cambridge English TV channel, and you can find a lot of webinars and videos that talk about our exams. They talk about what they help provide resources for assessment, so how to assess speaking, assess writing, and so on. That's on YouTube as well. And on this note, we shall say thank you very much.